Hello everyone, Kristina Werner here. Welcome to another video for SimonsStamp.com. Today I'm going to be playing with these two die cut sets or die sets from Simon. These are really bold greetings and I was trying to think of ways that I could really play up these greetings. So I'm going to do some watercoloring on them and then make them super glossy and share some tips along the way. So I'm starting out with some cold pressed watercolor paper from Strathmore. This is the pre-cut 5x7 watercolor paper. I've taped it down to a hardboard since I can do lots of watercoloring with that and then it won't warp too much. And before I started painting, I actually just penciled out kind of a large shape for each one of these greetings so that I could make sure that I color enough for each shape. I'm going to be using 3 different colors of Distress ink reinkers. I've got Picked Raspberry, Candied Apple, and Seedless preserves. I'm going to be putting these onto a palette, a slick surface. You could even just use a dinner plate, and then pick them up with a wet brush and bring it over to my project. I'm wetting all of my watercolor paper liberally with a spray bottle, and then I'm going to use a size 6 round brush to pick up the color. So the Reinker ink is very concentrated, so I knew that if I just dropped in a tiny bit, that color would really bloom, especially on this wet paper. For both of the greetings, I'm using Picked Raspberry, and for the greeting on the top that will say Hugs and Kisses, I just use the Candied Apple. So this greeting that's on top is going to be pink and red mostly. And then for the greeting on the bottom that says, I think the world of you, that one is going to have the Seedless preserve. So it's going to be more purple and pink. I thought it'd be really fun to kind of show 2 different variations. These are going to sort of be Valentine's Day cards, but they could also just be used all year round. They don't say Valentine's Day specifically, but I did use some Valentine's Day colors. I am highly influenced by the time of year when I am creating. After I dropped on some droplets of color, I then picked up my board and tipped it so that gravity would force those colors to start moving. And I also used my paintbrush to dab on a little bit extra water just to get some of those colors to start blending with others to coax them to move. And for areas where it needed a little more color, I just went ahead and dropped in some more color. I do love how this looks, especially after it's completely dry, because sometimes if you have those white areas that are kind of blooming a little bit because there's no color there, it starts to look like tie-dye. I think it's a really cool effect. Now, I wanted both of these greetings to have full color so that no matter where my die was placed, I would get a full color for all of the words. But if you wanted to leave some white areas, I think they look really cool. Like the area between the 2 greetings, those little white splotches, I think that's what makes it look like tie-dye. So after I dried everything and removed it from a hardboard, I die cut each greeting out of my watercolor paper. Now the watercolor paper is very soft. Sometimes it wants to hold everything together, but in the end, everything came apart beautifully. I also cut each greeting 3 additional times out of some solar white cardstock from Neenah. And then I stacked the 3 layers for each greeting, one on top of the other, just glued them together using some liquid glue and, put dabs of glue all over the greeting and then place them on top of each other. So at this point, I've got 2 sets for each greeting, one that is white, that is 3 layers in thickness, and then I have my watercolor greetings. So in order to create my really glossy greetings, I'm actually going to do some heat embossing with clear embossing powder. And because these are already cut, I needed to create some handles for these to kind of live on while I do my embossing. So I just cut off some strips of watercolor paper from my panel that was left over, put some tape runner adhesive on it, used my finger to remove a little bit of that stickiness, and then adhered my greetings. I then pressed a clear embossing ink onto each greeting. I'm using Versamark here, but you could use a clear embossing ink from Simon or Reinker or any other brands that have a clear embossing ink. The SimonsStamp.com store has many different clear embossing inks and all of them work great. So after I applied some clear embossing powder in particular, this is the color Icicle from Brutus Monroe, I tapped off the excess and then hit that with my heat tool. So at this point, there is only one layer of clear embossing powder on this greeting. I repeated the same exact steps with the other greeting and then put all that clear embossing powder on top, tapped off the excess, and then heat set it until it was clear and melted. I then went back to my very first greeting, the first one, and I did the same exact steps. I applied the clear embossing ink, applied a clear embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set this with my heat tool. Now you'll notice that the second time that it's melting, it melts super fast. That's because it's got that layer of embossing powder underneath that has already melted once. So it does melt very quickly. So that's 2 layers of embossing powder. I'm going to speed up the video footage here so you can see the process, but essentially I'm going to do 4 coats of embossing powder. Clear embossing powder looks great like this, and it gives a really glossy effect over whatever's underneath. This is a really fun thing to do for greetings or die cuts or anything that you really want to have a glossy effect. You can get somewhat of the same look, or almost practically the same look really, by using Reinker glossy accents. And at first I wanted to do these watercolor greetings and then just put the glossy accents on top. But then I realized that with such intricate die cuts with these words, it would be very difficult to keep that glossy accents, just on the greeting itself. So then I thought, you know what? I should do multiple layers of clear embossing powder and I'll get a similar effect. So here's after that 4th layer on that greeting, and then here it is the 4th layer on the Hugs and Kisses. And I think these just turned out so super cool. It really makes the greetings stand out and pop out on your card. After melting this 4th layer, I then removed them from my temporary handles by very gently wiggling them until they were released from that adhesive. And when I did that, there were some little jagged edges from where the clear embossing powder sort of melded into each other. You can really see it on this Hugs and Kisses one. There's going to be kind of a jagged little edge around the S's on the bottom of the greeting. You can fix that by just heat setting that area once again, and it just melts all that embossing powder and it gets sucked back into the rest of the powder that's already there, and you have a really smooth edge. So that's a great way to kind of clean it up. So here are the 2 greetings. They look so cool. They look like candy to me. So fun. Now, I said earlier you could definitely leave them as is, but I had already stacked the white versions of these words. So I went ahead and adhered that 4th layer, which is the colorful glossy layer, right on top. And that finishes up these greetings. And I'm actually going to set them aside for a minute while I work on a textured background to go behind these greetings. The cards I'm making today are super simple and easy, but I did want to leave a big white area behind it to really let these greetings shine. I'm using the Spellbinders Tufted 3D Embossing Folder. It's one of my favorites. And I'm going to be using it with watercolor paper, the same type of watercolor paper that I used for my watercolor greetings. I sprayed the front and back of the watercolor paper a couple of times with a spray bottle, put it inside that embossing folder, and then ran that through my Platinum 6 machine. So you can see the beautiful texture that this gives. I've used this embossing folder many, many times over the couple of years that I've owned it, and it just is stellar every time. I cut it down to 2 pieces of equal size that would fit onto some A2 cards, and then put foam adhesive on the back and adhered them to a craft note card. The last thing to do is just adhere my greetings to the front of these cards. So I used that same liquid adhesive on the back of each greeting and then pressed it down on top of this textured background. And I did not forget the little tiny dot on top of the eye on this greeting. I did all of those steps for the little tiny dot as well. So I'm going to adhere that right in the spot right above that eye. The last greeting goes on right over here with some glue on the back. And that's going to finish my cards for today. I think you could even add some additional embellishments to these cards, maybe some glossy hearts or some little flowers or whatever you'd like, but I kept these pretty simple so that those greetings would stand out. Thanks so much for watching today. All the supplies that I've used, including the distress reinkers, the watercolor paper, the clear embossing powder, everything I've used are listed down below in the video description. Thanks so much for joining me today. I will be back soon with some more videos. And once again, thanks for watching.
I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at simonsaysstamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.